Hi everybody, it's Kath back again. Really sorry about what's happening, but every single time we try and load a photo on Wirecast, it seems to stop the audio for some reason. So we're going to try again and just actually leave me in the background and just put the photo on top of it. So if you see me in the background behind the photo, don't mind me, just have a look at what the photo is and we'll carry on from there. So Kaz, if you can try and put up that first Woodlands Kingfisher photo for me, please, and let's see what happens. Okay, so the first Woodlands Kingfisher photo, just a background behind it before I start with the photography as such. This little Woodlands Kingfisher actually had a bit of a rough afternoon, and he was getting chased by a goshawk around our garden at home, and I was sort of taking a rest on the bed, and I saw this blue streak go past the window, and I saw this grey streak go past the window, and I ran outside to have a look, and this poor little thing was getting chased around the garden. So I grabbed my camera and I ran outside. I thought maybe I can try and get these two in flight. And unfortunately what happened next is the poor little kingfisher was so worried about trying to get away, it didn't see the window and smacked right into the window. So it sort of stood there a bit dazed and confused and waddled past the window and eventually stood next to one of the chairs on the side of our sort of lounge wall area and stayed there probably for about 2 hours before it flew off. So I was quite worried about it, but it eventually came right and flew off and is hopefully doing fine. But that's why I managed to get very close to it, is because it was obviously not in the mood to be flying anyway, so it was very tolerant of me whether it wanted to be or not. So that's it sitting on the ground, and that's the story behind where the shot was and why I took it. So the photo for the composition was I could basically go at any angle that I wanted to with this kingfisher, because it was obviously allowing me to get close. I crawled straight up to it and decided which angle looked the best, and obviously because it was watching me and because I was so close to it, its head moved wherever I was going, which was perfect. So I basically had a good angle from whichever angle I was going for. So that is the before photo of my little kingfisher that I took. So Kaz, then if you can move on to the after photo of the kingfisher, and this is the one that I put on my blog. I like both photos, and I could probably use the first photo just as much as this photo, because the first photo shows a lot more of the blue in the Woodlands Kingfisher wings, which I really like as well. But with this photo on Photoshop, I changed it to sepia, and then I just highlighted the red color in his beak a bit and tried to accentuate some of the blue a bit. So I brought that out by using a tool called a dodge tool, which is a tool that highlights colors. So I used that and sort of highlighted those colors, changed the sepia a bit, and then after that I added in some contrast, a little bit of brightness, and sharpened it out at the end, and that's how I got this particular photo. Also with adding in a lot of contrast, the background became a lot blacker, which I actually liked. So what I was trying to get away was sort of seeing as much of the background which wasn't natural as possible. So that's why I sort of went with this photo at the end rather than sticking with the first photo. But both photos I love, and I took it with my Canon, my new Canon, my 7D, and I also took it with my 500mm lens. So I tried to stay as far away from him as possible to give him his space, which then allowed me to, with that little bit of extra bit of zoom, pull out my zoom and use that. So I wasn't on top of him, but I was fairly close to him, but because I used my 500mm, I could get in a lot closer without completely stressing out the bird. So I think he was quite grateful for that. Right. So then, moving on to my next photo, and this particular photo is of an elephant cow, and this photo I took while I was out on drive with Patrick one afternoon. We had a fantastic elephant sighting round about Philemon's Dip Cutline area, and we must have stayed with these ellies probably for about 2 hours or so, and I have to admit it's probably the most interaction I've ever seen with elephants. It was just amazing, with little ellies who kept on mock charging the vehicle and sort of running and sliding and sleeping on anthills and termite mounds, and it was just amazing. And this particular elephant cow got very, very close to us at one point, and we actually thought she was pregnant. I think she was definitely pregnant. And because she was so relaxed and eating her branch right next to us, it allowed me to use my 500 mil to its maximum potential with my new cannon. And I mean, I was basically probably about 2 meters away from her, using my 500 mil to its full as well, to its full capacity. So that's why I managed to get quite a composition with her, because she was so close. And this particular photo, the before photo, I haven't touched at all. I haven't cropped it. I haven't added anything or taken anything away. So what you see is exactly what I took at that particular point. Unfortunately, on this day, the weather was quite mizzy and very, very cloudy and overcast. So because the light wasn't fantastic, hence the fact the photo is a bit flat. So for me, if I was going to do something with this photo, aside from what I've done, which you'll see in the next after photo, I would definitely add in some saturation and some contrast, just to maximize the colors and sort of the contours and whatnot, because as I said, with very flat light and cloudy light, it's quite difficult to work with. So that's the before photo of our elephant cow. So if we go to the after photo of our elephant cow, I did change quite a bit on this. You can probably see just from moving from the one photo to the other that Caroline did for me, is that I have cropped it. And with cropping it and taking some of the photo out, it's obviously brought her closer to us and has more of her in the frame as such. So that is firstly the first thing that I did. And then after that, I changed it to black and white. And obviously with animals like pachyderms that are originally grey in colour, I think it always, changing it to black and white is so easy, because they're grey in colour already, and it really does enhance the photo quite a bit. So depending on what your composition is of a photo, changing black and white or grey animals to a black and white photo always looks good. So I changed her to black and white, which was the first thing after I cropped it. And then after that, I went into my exposure, and CS3 Photoshop, which is what I use, also has an exposure button. So you can go into that under adjustments and change how much or how little exposure, if you're underexposed or overexposed accidentally, and all sorts of other things. So I went into there and slightly overexposed her, so that you got all those little wrinkles and crinkles coming out of her head and her ears and that sort of thing. And then after that, I went into contrast just to enhance what I'd done again, and then just sharpened her up a bit. And that was my final product. So I really, really like this photo. I mean, I think, you can do so much with photos. This is the way I decided to go, but with that original photo, you could do so much with it, depending on what you like and what style of photography you enjoy, or whether you just like a natural looking photo that you do nothing with, or whether you decide to completely overboard and really overexpose it and bring in different things and all sorts. But for me, what I did with this enhanced her features, and I always love elephants in black and white, so I was quite happy with what the end product looked like here. Okay, so that's it for our elephant cow photo. So we're going to move on to our next photo, which is a very beautiful flower that I found at Buffelshoek Dam. And Herman and I actually went out one day to do some photography and camera work, and we found ourselves at Buffelshoek Dam, and we were actually looking for the crocodile. And in the midst of looking for the crocodile, I found this fantastic bush next to the side of the road that had these wonderful yellow and pink flowers on it. And I thought, oh, that's a nice bush to take photos of. And at this particular point, I actually didn't have my macro lens, and I hope at some point when I do take my macro out, I can actually take another photo of this particular flower with it, because I actually used my 500mm to take this photo. So it's not as close as I would like, and there's not as much detail getting in there as you would obviously get with a macro, but the result you'll see when I crop the photo and the after photo is actually quite nice. So I was quite happy with it at the end. I also found out from Mark later on, after I put this on my blog, that this beautiful flower, as is with all the flowers that I think are beautiful here, are all alien invasive species. So we don't really well, we're not supposed to like this flower, but I still think it looks pretty. So that's the background behind that. So that's also with my Canon 7D. At the moment, I've got both of my cameras in my case that I take out and drive with me. So to avoid changing lenses, my 7D has got my big lens on it, and my 400D has got my more wider 18 to 55 lens on it that I could take backgrounds and landscapes and sunsets and all that sort of thing with. So that's how I do it at the moment. So this particular photo, I took quite a few of them. It was in the middle of the day as well, though, so the light isn't that great, and that's why it looks a bit washed out to me as well. So you'll see in the next photo, my after photo of what it looks like. I cropped it, which for me makes a huge difference already, and because of the composition of the flower already, cropping it into that rectangular shape brings out the flower into the photo 100% more, I think. And then just because it was the middle of the day and the light wasn't that great and we sort of had the sun blaring right down on us, I just put more saturation into it just to add a lot more color into it, and then just put some contrast into it just to sort of maximize the contours once again and sharpened it up, and that was that. I really didn't do much with this photo except add in some color and contrast to it, but I think the main part to making this photo better for me was actually just the crop and just cutting out the part of the photo that I didn't need. And obviously when you take photos, you try and crop the photo already when you're framing the photo before you take the photo for how you want the photo to suit when you're done with it. So when when you're having a look at your composition and you think, okay, right, this is what I want to get from the photo. If I'm taking a photo of the baboon, I actually want to see some of the scenery that he's looking at on the right hand side, so I'm going to put the baboon in on the left and give him some space on the right. You think of all these things when you take the photo, but sometimes when you have a look at it afterwards, there's always something that could be wrong with it. Your focus could be slightly out, the light looks horrendous, you didn't notice that there was a huge grass stalk in front of his face, or whatever it might be. So sometimes just cropping it or cropping out what you don't like, which you didn't initially see at the beginning, can make a huge difference. Okay, so that is our invasive flower photo. Let's move on to the next. Okay, and this photo is of Nduna, and this was the afternoon that Jared and I went out and found Karula, Nduna and Mishu on this Dacre kill that was, I think, round about the junction between Treehouse Road and Philemon's Cut Line, and that area where we off-roaded quite a bit, and then we spent most of the afternoon into the evening with them as well. So we found Nduna in the tree with this kill and spent quite a lot of time with him. Also, it happened to be one of those afternoons that was very, very overcast. Light was completely washed out, overexposed, not great at all, and there's not much you can do about that, so you just sort of have to work with what you've got. So the lighting could have been better by far, but anyway, so this is what we had, and we had Nduna in the tree, so I snapped away. And this was also with my Canon 7D with my 500mm as well. I think most of these are, except for my panoramics, which we'll get to towards the end. And I tried to get him in a couple of poses. I took a lot of verticals that worked very well with the long tree, with him standing, with the Dacre hanging down as well. But I quite like this one of him looking away with a bit of the Dacre hanging down at the bottom. So you can see the background is obviously quite washed out because of the very overcast day, but you've still got him in focus. You can still see exactly what's going on. You can see he's looking at something out there that's caught his eye on the side, and he is in, I think, good focus and good light for him. You can see all his rosettes, so I was quite happy with the way this photo came out, but I thought there was some improvement. So if we go on to the after photo of Nduna, you can see what I did as well here. I don't know if you noticed from the before to the after that I took out some of the tree. So there was a little bit of the tree at the bottom here on the left hand side and some on the right hand side as well, and I took all of that out with my clone stamp tool, which basically just clones whatever you wanted to. So you clone, say for example, some of this white, and then you stamp it onto whatever you're trying to get rid of. So I'd clone some of the white and then I'd stamp it over the trees that I didn't want. It does take quite a while, and you do have to blow up the photo to obviously get in there and make sure that you do it properly. So I just took out all of the distracting leaves at the bottom that I didn't like particularly. And then just added in quite a bit of contrast just to get him looking a little bit better. And then I also put a warming filter on this one. I didn't do sepia on it, but I just put a bit of a warming filter in so it didn't look as washed out as beforehand with the light. But as you can see, there's not much you can do with the light because that's the way it is at that particular point. But I think adding more warmth into the photo and just cropping it slightly and taking out some of the extra leaves that were possibly a bit distracting. And I was quite happy with the way this one turned out. Also for me in particular, what I really enjoy doing is with a lot of my photos that I do with sepia and that are overexposed, and all of those photos, a lot of them have white borders, as in there's not much happening on the outside of the border. So I'll get rid of all of the excess sort of foliage and whatnot, for example. So if you do blow it up and you put it in a white frame, or you put it on a big canvas with a white frame, the photo blends into the framing or onto the canvas, which is what I really like. So it's not necessarily just a square photo with 4 edges on it. Some of the photo actually blends away and you just have the subject that you look at, which I quite like. So that's sort of what I was going for here. Okay, moving on to our next photo, and this is Mishu. And Mishu, this photo of Mishu was actually on exactly the same day. This was just after Induna had jumped out of the tree and sauntered off and done his thing, and then Mishu came around the corner and had a look at the tree. He was already quite full though, so he sort of went up to the tree and sniffed around and stared up and thought about it for quite a while, and then decided, no thanks very much, I'm not going to try and climb the tree. So he just waddled back off and eventually lay down next to a huge clump of bushes and lay there very, very satisfied and full and not really knowing what to do with himself. So as you can see, it looks more like a very dozy, sleepy Mishu because he's very, very full. So that's the expression I think he has on his face. And this is where the photo comes from. So also with my 7D, with my 500mm lens, he was quite close to the vehicle, probably about 3 meters away. But once again, obviously using the 500mm, I could really get in there and get a nice close-up shot, which is what I wanted. And once again, the photo looking a teeny bit flat because of the light. So I did change that. But you'll see once again when we have a look at the next photo, there are so many ways that you could have gone with the photo. You could have just added in the saturation and contrast here and just made it a fantastic photo the way it is, just by adding some more color in it. Or you could go in the direction that I went in and I just played with the photo, and this is what I landed up with. So if we go to the next photo, you'll see it's changed quite a bit there. And basically what I did, obviously, first of all, was cropped it. You'll see that it's slightly different placement from where it was beforehand. So I just cropped it slightly so that his head moves over to the left a little bit. And then I changed him into black and white, is obviously the second one that I did. But with the black and white options that you have in Photoshop as well, there's so many different ways that you can choose to change a photo into black and white. It's not only one button. There's a desaturate button, which just changes it. You can go into the normal saturation and then just take the cursor down to the left and take out the color that way. Or you can do it this way, which is you choose the black and white button, and then it opens up a whole block in itself, which then allows you to change all the different colors. So you can change greens, reds, yellows, magentas, blues, cyans, and you can really mix and match the colors within the black and white photo, which I think works much, much better rather than just changing it to a flat black and white color. You can really add depth into the photo with that particular button instead. So I used that, changed it around a bit, obviously because there was green in. I pumped up the green in the black and white, so it became a bit darker in the background, and then also chose the yellow one as well and moved the yellow cursor a bit to the left because he's obviously got a bit of a yellow coat, and that's how I got it into the black and white that it is. And then from there I just went to contrast, and I just mixed up the contrast a little bit as well, just to add emphasis to what I'd done already. And then just before I sharpened the photo, I did one more thing to this particular photo, and I went into the filter section in Photoshop and I actually put some film grain into the photo. So sometimes if you're looking for a particular look in a photo, be it noise by adding in lots of little dots to your photo, or ink outlines where it really sort of defines the edges in your photo, or you can go for something like film grain, which is what I did, which just adds a kind of exactly that grainy feeling to the photo. So it's not 100% crisp, And that's what I was looking for in this photo, and I was quite happy with how that film grain actually came out. You can leave it completely, also looks great that way. It just really depends on how you feel that day, I suppose, and what you think looks good. So that's it for Mishu. Let's move on. Okay, and this was the other day when we saw that first big herd or big dazzle of zebra up on quarantine. It was one of our shorter drives where Jared and I saw the python. No, sorry, it wasn't the python, it was the cobra. And this fantastic dazzle of zebra that was just down the road. And I managed to get, I think, which is quite a quaint photo of these 4 particular zebra, which is obviously 3 adults, including this one little foal that was on the right. And they're all feeding happily, swishing their tails on the left-hand side, and the little foal is sort of standing there going, okay, this is good. And I really, really like the photo. As you should know by now with me, is I like bum shots. So as soon as I saw these 3 standing there, I thought, ooh, nice shot, and whipped out the camera and snapped away. And you'll see what I've done with it, and I really, really like this photo. I'll add it to my bum shot collection, should I say. So if we move on to the next photo of what the after photo looks like, quite completely different, I think. And I really, really like this photo. I think it's got a lot of character. I think it tells a story in itself, and I think it's really, really cute. You get to see the little foal on the right-hand side, and you get to see what the adults do best on the left-hand side. So what I did to this photo, obviously, as you can see from beforehand, was I completely cropped the photo. So I took out a lot of the top of the photo and a bit of the bottom of the photo, so that all you focus on are the zebra. That's it. There's no distracting background behind you looking up and sort of looking away from the zebra. All you do when you look at this photo is see zebra, and that's it, which is exactly what I was going for. So after cropping it, I went into exactly the same tool as I did for the Mishu photo, and that is the black and white tool, and then changed the green, obviously because there was so much green grass in the background, changed the green so it went quite dark in the background, and then also changed a bit of yellow because there is obviously some yellow grass in there as well, and that was it. And then once I was happy with the black and white contrast, pressed OK on that button, and then went into the normal contrast and mixed up the contrast quite a bit, added a little bit of brightness in just to counteract for all the dark stuff that I'd put in on the black and white and on the contrast. Obviously when you use contrast, because you're contrasting colors together, the photo can become quite dark. So it's always, very important to make sure that when you use contrast that you don't land up with an extremely dark photo at the end of it. So always enhances the photo, but sometimes can make a photo too dark. So added a bit of brightness in with that, and then after I'd done that, I just sharpened it up, and that was it. So in essence, haven't really changed much of these photos, but have just kind of cut off what we don't need and changed it to a color that we think looks better. And for me, zebras always look awesome in black and white. I mean, black and white zebras in black and white. I mean, it's made for each other as far as I'm concerned. So most of my zebras go into black and white unless something really doesn't look good there, and then I'll try something else. So I was quite happy with that photo. I haven't put this one on my blog yet, so I probably will in the next couple of days or so. Haven't got around to putting this one on yet. So that's that. Right, then moving on to my next photo, which is a fantastic herd of buffalo that Jared and I found one afternoon. And once again, you can sort of see in the background with this photo that we had lots of clouds at this particular point. It wasn't a completely overcast day, but it was quite cloudy. This was on Gowrie, Maine, I think, if I remember correctly, and they were all sitting on the side of the road, relaxing and sleeping. There were quite a lot on the other side, on the right-hand side of the road as well, but they were all sort of huddled in this mass of buffalo in the middle. And of course, with buffalo, they're just hundreds of thousands of flies, and they were just swarming flies all over the place, and lots of young ones as well walking around. And just took a couple of snaps of them and thought, well, we'll get home and see what we can do with that, if anything. If we don't like it, we'll get rid of them. And I kept this photo, and I thought maybe I can do something with this photo later. So I took this particular photo with my 400D actually, and I used my 18 to 55 lens, obviously because I wanted to get the bigger picture. I wanted more of the background in it. I was looking for a lot of the sky as well, and you'll see why in the next photo. So that's why I used my other camera for this one. So if we go on to the next photo, which is the after photo of these buffalo, you'll see why I decided to keep the sky in this photo. And I think this is partly why the photo for me has as much feeling as it does at the end, is because I changed the look of the clouds quite a bit in this photo, and I think it adds quite a different feel to it. So obviously, as you can see what I did, I cropped it again. So I made sure that the bottom of the photo, a lot of it came out and sort of just came below that particular buffalo's legs. So that's where I started the bottom of the photo, and then left most of the area at the top, and then just cropped a bit on the sides. So started off with that, and then from there I changed it into black and white again. I tried using normal saturation and changing colors that way, and it really wasn't working for me. I thought it just doesn't look great. The colors weren't working, the sky was looking a bit funny, and I thought, no, this actually isn't working in color at all. I thought if it doesn't work in black and white, then I'm just going to get rid of this particular photo. So changed it into black and white, and it became an entirely different story. So once I'd done the whole black and white story, changed a bit of the greens and the yellows and the magentas around, and the blues as well, obviously, for the sky, and got the sort of the contrast in the colors on black and white that I wanted, and then added in my normal contrast again on top of that. And then what I did to enhance the clouds at the top is I took my dodge tool, which is probably in the middle of your toolbar, and made, when you use your dodge tool, you get a little circle that you can make as small or as big as you want to, and I made it as big as the clouds, and I went across the clouds as if I was erasing, and did it quite a couple times. And the dodge tool enhances the darker parts in the picture, so anything that's of a darker pixel in your picture, it enhances and makes darker. So all of the bits in the clouds that were already a little bit darker than the rest of the sky came out, and I just carried on doing it till I was happy with the effect, and then I stopped. So that's how I got the clouds to sort of punch out as much as they did. And then after that, I just sharpened it up a bit. I think with this particular photo as well, the other tool, and I've gone completely blank at this particular point what it's called, but it's the other tool of the dodge tool. The one tool, the burn tool, what am I saying? The dodge tool is the one that highlights it, and the burn tool is the one that makes it darker. Sorry, everyone, I'm getting confused here. Burn, obviously, burn makes something dark, makes something darker. I'm trying to put the two together. Okay, so I used my burn tool on the top to change everything to make it darker and bring out and accentuate what was there already. And then I used my dodge tool, which makes everything lighter, just to kind of lighten up a bit of the trees at the top here. Because as what I said with the contrast, when you start contrasting things, it makes certain parts darker. And because everything is fairly dark at this particular point, or this half of the photo, I took the dodge part of, or the dodge tool, and just highlighted a little bit of the trees at this particular point, just to bring out the foliage so you could see it again. Otherwise you landed up with great sky, sort of you could see the buffalo, and then very dark trees. So that's how I managed to sort of counteract the two and have the best of both worlds really there. And that's it for that photo. Just sharpened it up a bit. The other thing that I actually did with this photo as well, I don't know if you noticed, is this particular part of the road as well. Obviously it goes all the way up this main road. There's a whole telephone line that goes up the road. And I maximize this particular part of the photo to as much as I could get, and I worked on the right hand side of the photo and took out all the electricity poles and wire. So you can see the fire break on the right hand side where the pole should be, but I've taken all of the poles out using my clone stamp tool, and I've sort of clone stamped my way up and down. So you can't see the poles anymore. And I was actually going to leave the poles in originally, and then had a look at it and thought, no, the poles are actually quite distracting, and who really wants a man-made thing in there? And then who really wants a man-made sort of thing in their wildlife photo? So that's why I decided to try and take out the poles, and it actually worked quite well. So that's it for that photo. Moving on to our last before and after photo, and then after this particular sunset photo, I've got 3 panoramic photos that I'm going to show you as well before we end, and I'll explain those to you when we get there. But just for this particular photo, I took this photo on drive with Jared again. We were out one afternoon, and this was on Zoe's Road, and we were actually viewing a fantastic single ellie bull on the right hand side of the jigger, and then on the left hand side we had 2 great white rhinos. So in between looking up the white rhinos and then reversing down the road to have a look at the elephant bull, I managed to catch a glimpse of the sunset on the left hand side and managed to take some photos. So I did quite a lot of photos for this particular sunset. I took a lot of normal rectangular panoramic type horizontal photos, and then I decided to have a look and see if I could take some vertical photos of the sunset. Obviously sunsets are not necessarily what you think of as a vertical photo, because it seems to work so much better being a horizontal photo, but because these particular sun rays were sort of shining down at a really nice angle, it was sort of cutting through the grass quite nicely and also getting quite a bit of sun flare through the lens. And I thought, well, let's give this a bash and see whether it'll actually look nice or not. So snapped away and took the photo, and this is what we landed up with. So this is obviously the original before photo. You can see a bit of the sun flare coming out in the front. You can see all the grass in the front, still quite bright at this particular point. The sun was still very bright. It hadn't got to that point where it was sort of soft and orange, and this particular sunset actually wasn't that fantastic orange that sometimes we see. It was more of a sort of bright sunset and then disappeared. So if we move on to the after photo of this, I just cropped it slightly so that I was happy with where the sun was in comparison to the size of the photo. So I put it on one of the third lines, as we call it, so it's not in the center of the photo either way. So it's not, as you can say, if you look down the photo, it's just off center to the left, and if you were to cut the photo in half the other way, it's just above to the left. So that for me worked out in terms of composition that I was happy with. And all I did here, obviously with this kind of photo and the sun, as I said, you're never going to get that fantastic orange look out of it unless you really play with a photo. And even with this, if you try and maximize the saturation in it, you're going to get very funky looking colors because there's no orange in there at all. So you're never going to get that orange or red sunset that you know, if that's what you're looking for. So all I did here was I just maximized the colors that we had, and I also went back to using that dodge tool, which really does help not only with highlighting and lightening certain pictures, but it can also really accentuate colors sometimes in a photo. So between putting in a little bit of saturation just to bring out some of the green of the grass and some of the yellow coming through from the sun rays, I just also used a bit of my dodge tool just to accentuate what colors were there. And then I've just put in some contrast just so you can see a little bit more of the leaves and the grass and everything that's going on in the photo. Also, by doing the contrast and the saturation as well, it also makes the sky a little bit bluer at the top, which is nice. So it's not completely white or yellow blown out as it was beforehand. And that's it for this photo. If you have a look at the before and the after, I mean, you can definitely see the difference, but there's not a completely huge difference from it. But I actually like this particular photo because it's not your typical sunset photo. As I was saying beforehand, it's a different angle, it's a different view, and it's a completely different color. So quite like it. I think it's unique, as it were. Okay, and then moving on to our panoramic photos, and I've got 3 of these panoramics to show you before we leave for this evening. And I don't have a before and an after of the panoramics, obviously, because it's quite difficult to show you about anything between 5 to 10 or 15 photos that's stitched together to form a panoramic. But if some of you haven't seen these panoramics beforehand, I thought I'd just show them to you, tell you a bit about where I took them, and then also just explain to you how you can do panoramics in Photoshop as well. So this particular panoramic I took on Zoe's Road, and Zoe's Road, if you have a look at the photo, is obviously on the right hand side where the little 2-track is that you can see on the right. So all I did was I started off with taking a photo straight ahead of the jigger, and then I just worked my way around to the left. So I took photo, probably about 6 or 7 photos all the way to the left, swiveled my way all the way around, basically nearly in a 360 direction to the left, but probably leaving out about a sort of 3-4 meter gap on the one side. And then after that, I decided, okay, right, now I can try and work on this in Photoshop and try and stitch it together. I've really started getting into panoramics. I really enjoy them. I never used to do as many panoramics as I do now. And when I'm in a particular landscape or situation and I have a look at the scenery, I think, well, can I actually make a decent panoramic photo out of this? Is it going to work for me? And it doesn't always necessarily, for me, have to be the most amazing scenic shot. Or I've got some really great ones of clouds over the last 2 months, and that huge storm that was at Buffelshoek Dam that one afternoon, which turned out really nicely. But for me, it's not necessarily about, wow, that's an amazing shot, I can get a panoramic. Sometimes just taking a really nice morning or afternoon shot of a nice scenic area and stitching it together works just as well. And for me, this is exactly what this particular area of Zoe's Road is about. You can sort of see through the trees at one particular point, and you can really see quite far as it dips down into a little bit of a valley and comes up again. And it just is a really nice area and works really well for a panoramic photo. So once I'd got... Okay. So once I'd got into Photoshop, I then went into File and I went down to Auto Emerge, which is where you stitch your photos together. And then from Auto Emerge, it tells you to merge your photo. You go into that, you browse for the photos that you want to stitch together, and you highlight, say, however many photos it is once you've had a look. And then from there, you select all of them, and Photoshop does it all for you. You wait anything from 1 to 6 minutes, depending on how big the files are and how many files there are. And Photoshop will stitch it all together for you. And then once it's done it, a picture will come up and you can see how good or how bad the panoramic photo looks. Sometimes, depending on how up and down or how shaky you are with taking the photo, depends on how much of a space you actually have to work with, because sometimes if you've gone up and down too much as you've taken the photo, by the time the computer or the program has stitched it together, you're left with maybe 2 or 3 centimeters worth of picture lengthways that you can actually work with. So it's very important, if you can't use a tripod, to keep as still as possible when you're taking it, so that you have a bigger space to work with. So then after that, you flatten it, because the Photoshop makes it into layers. So you have to flatten that image and then you can work with it. You obviously have to crop it, because things will be a bit out. I mean, it always will be. You're never going to get a perfect photo at the end of stitching a photo together. So you crop your photo and then you work with it. And because this is Zoe's Road in the middle of the day, lovely photo the way it was, all I did was crop it, add a bit of saturation into it, a little bit of contrast, and that was it. So moving on to the next photo. This photo I actually took at Buffelshoek. Okay, this photo I took at Buffelshoek, and this was in the middle of the day as well. I thought, fantastic clouds here, so all I did was I stopped and I took a whole panoramic of the sky with a little bit of the tree on the left-hand side, and all I was trying to do here was get as much of these fantastic clouds into the photo as I could. It was just really pretty clouds. So I just took it all across the sky and then stitched it together. This one proved to be a little bit more difficult, because with the sky and you're doing an arc, it's quite difficult to keep things exactly straight. So it was very wonky when I got into Photoshop, and I did have to cut quite a bit of the photo out, but managed to keep quite a bit of it, and quite happy with the right hand side of the photo. You get to see all the fluffy clouds moving into big white cloud on the left with a bit of the tree. So that was that one. And then our last photo for this evening is one of the panoramics that I took at Gowrie Dam. And this was one morning that I was there with Mark doing a bit of a dam cam morning with our camera. And the sunrise was coming over really nicely. One of those sunrises that aren't those fantastic oranges and reds, but really worked well for this photo. And the right hand side is where I started on the dam wall and then just moved across to probably about the middle of the dam. Took all of the photos together and then did exactly the same thing and stitched it all. But because I managed to keep the camera quite still, I had quite a bit of photo to work with at the end after the stitching. Just added in a bit of color and some contrast, and that was it. So most of the panoramics I haven't done much to except cropped it and then added a bit of color and contrast, and that's it. So I think that's it for our photos for this evening. Just to check, unless I've missed one. Yeah, that's it. That's our last one for this evening, our panoramic Gowrie sunrise. So folks, I hope everyone's enjoyed my little photography chat and what I've taken over the last couple of weeks. I really hope to do another chat, hopefully in the next couple of weeks as well, when Mark's away again or whatever happens. I will be there to fill in for a fireside chat, or when somebody's not here or not available. So we can do some more photos, hopefully very soon. Otherwise, if you haven't seen some of my photos, or this is the first time that you're catching up with them, they are, or most of them are always on my blog. So please have a look at my blog. It's blog.safari.tv if you want to have a look at any of my photos or just to catch up with what's happening around camp. Otherwise, I also do, probably on about a 3 or 4 week basis, put some albums up on Facebook. So some of my photos will be there as well. But that's it for me for now. Thank you very much for joining me and for sticking around through our audio problems at the beginning. And join us tomorrow morning for another hopefully great drive. We'll see what we can see out there, and the weather I think should be good to go. So cheers for now, and see you all tomorrow.